Recording in progress.
There we go. Okay. Anytime you
Fabulous.
would like. You
Alrighty.
want?
Oh, hey, I see a person I know in the waiting room for the main thing, but they're probably literally signing in to give a different class. Um, okay. Hi, I'm Athelina. I am from Antir. I'm in the Barony of Sigurd in the Principality of Tiri. Um, mostly, probably folks would know me from like archery or thrown weapons or bardic or something. But on the side, I kind of more outside the ACA actually. I have a deep nerd for 12th century literature. So let's see. Also, don't mind any snarfling you hear in the background. It's very early in the morning, and that is just Brado having morning snufflings. It's how it is. Okay, so I'm just gonna start a PowerPoint here, and I'll probably like hop out of the PowerPoint every once in a while and be like, hey, let's ramble about the thing, because otherwise it's literally just gonna be like 40 minutes of me rambling about things. And my PowerPoint is very scruffy. It's not fancy. It should be fancier, definitely, for this topic, but it's not. Um, ooh, is that a person?
We
Hello,
have
person.
Hi.
we have a
I just
person.
woke up and look terrible, so you don't get to look at anything but my pretty
That's
flower.
okay. I'm wearing my garb over my pajamas. It is
I
not yet
support
light
you.
out here. Um, yeah, okay. I'm actually just gonna I'm gonna stop being able to see what's going on. So if you have like questions or things, put them in the chat and the moderator can have a look at that and like just you can just chime in. It's since it's kind of just the three of us, you can just, ask a question kind of whenever or, have a thought whenever. For now, I am going to start my PowerPoint um, and ramble for a bit, probably. So this will be a moment of screenception until I start the presentation. There we go. Did that work?
Yes, it did.
When the walls are covered.
Fabulous. Orfrois, when the walls are covered. Percival, his armor red. So I can hear some chuckling. Are we guessing what this? Oh, hi. Hi. Sorry, I'm saying hello to our Bernese Seneschal, who's now hanging out here.
For like 3 more days.
I mean, but you still are. Hi. You're also giving some classes.
It's true.
Yeah?
I
Are they
haven't
later?
slept yet.
Oh, geez. Were they
Uh-huh.
earlier or later?
No, they're later.
Fun times. Are you going to the event too?
No,
Okay. Yeah. That's
I'm
a
sleeping.
reasonable decision. Okay, so Orfrois, when the walls are covered. Percival, his armor red.
It's a metaphor.
Yeah, it might be a meme. Um, so here's some general ideas I'm gonna go over. Um, this is about 12th century literature and the use of color in it to kind of tell you what's going to be happening in the story. If you just be like, oh, hey, somebody has red armor. Okay, so they have red armor, but why? So we'll do like a little like tiny touch on some cultural context and some literary terms, and then go into some more specific examples. And I'm sorry, my PowerPoint is like the most bare bones, but I put it together about 3 hours ago, as one do. So we've, yeah, I'll move on here. So 12th century literature is in fact made of memes. One of the basic ideas that the authors in that century, in like, yeah, France-ish, give or take, one of their main ideas when they were writing was that their work would be better the more stuff they referenced in it. So, and the more layers of memes you could stack, all referencing each other, the cooler your work was. And it does not go in a straight line. So you can start the story and you notice some memes and you're like, oh, it probably means this. But then later there's more memes and they're referencing back and changing the meaning of the memes that happened before, which then gives you a different idea about what's probably happening in the story. And the more times you read through it, the more memes you find, the, deeper the meaning gets. And that's sort of the point. They were masters of meme layering and basically writing fan fiction in layers. So some folks may recognize this or not. It's a Star Trek meme about a alien that speaks in memes. So that was sort of the idea of the class.
No.
Oh, hello. Hi. Yeah, I'm just kind of like mowing through things. I'll pause every once in a while. I wanted to quickly touch on some of the literary terms that would be relevant to 12th century French literature. There are books and books and books and essays and giant academic debates about what these things mean or how they're used or whatever. So any kind of short blurb about what they mean is going to be like the most bare bones. But for starters, we're looking at the genre of romance. And this is not romance as we think of it now. It's when that started. This is the very beginning of that genre. And that genre did not start out as like, Harlequin romance type things. It started out in the 12th century as a sort of examining ways of courtly behavior, what ways of interacting with each other was a good idea, and kind of giving, kind of pivoting from a focus on like epic warrior battles in stories to, okay, but like, how do we interact with each other? What is, what is courtly behavior? Is it okay for people to be acting certain ways? And what does that mean? And it's very tied into the development of, political stuff, culture, et cetera, at the time. Matter in this case is basically subject matter. I mean, you can kind of boil it down to that. It's the stuff that it's the topics that they use to examine the stuff. So it's not the bigger concepts that they're examining. They're talking about Arthur or they're talking about Lancelot or whatever. So it would be, the matter of Britain or of wherever. But the matter is sort of the chunks of story. So like Marie de France would be using folktales that she's heard or came to her from somewhere, or maybe she made up, but if she says she hears them somewhere, then she's referencing something. So even if she's making them up herself, she's going to say she heard them somewhere. But this is the matter. The phrase the marvelous, as far as 12th century literature, is stuff that isn't a part of our world. It's a marvel. So anything that's beyond what would normally happen to people. In a lot of Arthurian literature of this time, this is going to involve kind of fairy tale elements, or any of the supernatural stuff, any of the, anytime that the rules of the world don't quite work the way we think they should. that's part of the marvelous. Adventure is, you go on an adventure, but it originally had a connotation of fate. You're supposed to be doing this thing. You might not know that you're supposed to be doing the thing, and you may or may not be successful at doing the thing unless you understand how to interact with it correctly. You can be fated to go on an adventure and completely unable to handle it, as we'll see from some of our examples. A lay is a type of literature. It's also within the Romance tradition. It's same thing, it's just verse instead of prose. They're kind of shorter things. Think like a rock ballad, but 12th century. And they may or may not have been actually to music, but they are verse. And then conjointure is, there isn't, I've used English words here for most of the things, but not for conjointure or lay. So for conjointure, this is it's a 12th century term. It was coined by Chrétien de Troyes, who was a 12th century author. He wrote the very first Quest for the Grail, which isn't called the Quest for the Grail, it's called Percival. And some of my examples will be from that. And conjointure is, again, there's a bazillion books debating what exactly it means, but the general idea is that all of the parts of a story are interconnected on many, many levels. And the more interconnected you can make all of the parts of it, so that's you're referencing to other stuff, the ideas that you're examining, how you describe them, how all of the bits of the story reference each other, the way that you weave that together makes for a good story. And if it is not woven well, then it is not a good example of conjointure. So it's been mentioned as a sort of it's often likened to fabric, but as a way of forming stories. 12th century literature does not go in a straight line. It doesn't have like, this is a story arc. It has but what is going on here? But now it's referencing this, and the entire meaning of this has changed. So we'll see a little bit of that in our examination of color. I wanted to provide a tiny political and cultural overview for kind of where the beginnings of the genre of romance, what was forming that. So this would be in the area of France, bit of England. It was not general, like the map didn't look the same in the 12th century. But this is the time when infighting among, neighboring nobles and stuff was being very heavily discouraged. And they were being encouraged to find ways of interacting that were a bit nicer to each other. So they were developing new social rules for how to interact and how to hang out in peacetime and still have a sense of meaning and of prowess without needing to be fighting each other. And I mean, this is where a strong development of tournament fighting came in. But, the infighting between neighboring areas was discouraged somewhat. At the same time, we're seeing a massive development in arts, music, literature, especially at the court of Poitiers, which I should have put the point further down because that will have happened because of Eleanor. Around this time is also when we've got the Crusades, which affect Western Europe rather a lot as far as culture goes. They end up bringing back a lot of luxury goods. Now, these luxury goods were already available in Western Europe through trade. They got a lot more available throughout the 12th century. And we're looking at spices, silk, dyes, marble, things like that. And it was generally considered that places like Constantinople they just had a crazy, you know, I don't know, overflow of luxury goods. Everything there was opulent. So the idea of this material opulence also was associated with an idea of that happens elsewhere. And maybe we get a hint of it here. But probably if something's opulent and super luxurious, the more luxurious it is, the more other it is, and this will carry meanings in the literature. Sometimes this meant that the goods were morally questionable, like their use in a story would be potentially morally questionable. Generally speaking, in the romances, the luxury items were a symbol of being very respectable. So they weren't super sketch in most of these stories. Their meanings are usually that anytime that there's these displays of opulence, that is lending respectability to the situation. Sometimes that is turned on its head intentionally. And a lot of this development of new ways of interacting in the arts and the literature and examining these ideas about how to interact with each other and, what courtly behavior was like happened surrounding Eleanor of Aquitaine and her children. Chrétien de Troyes, the person who wrote the Percival story, was possibly, we don't know, but possibly writing it in the court of Marie, who was the daughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine was known as she was from the south of France, and they had a lot more flamboyant fashion down there. They were not considered particularly pious. She got roasted a lot for being too flouncy and having too many opinions and, being too outspoken. But she also was a big supporter of the development of the arts. So at this point, before I dive into color references, I'm going to pause for a second and have a look at that chat. And if people want to unmute and ask a question or something, you're welcome to do that.
I think the chat looks good, like right now. No questions so far. So
cool. Excellent. Yeah. So onward. I'm going to get into actual examples. So green. I'm not looking at green in clothing here because that's a whole other thing. And I only have so much time and I don't actually know what time it is. I know we started a bit late too, so I'm going to kind of blast through some of this. So if green is being used to describe a place, and that probably means that place is a doorway. It's a liminal space between, a character's normal life and adventure or the marvelous. So either this signifies that they're going to now be on an adventure or they're going to be interacting with the marvelous. So I have examples from a couple of texts. I've mostly just stuck to Chrétien de Troyes and Marie de France as the authors here. but and I'm not going to be able to give summaries of all of the stories necessarily, but in Marie de France's Guichemar, this is a person who is injured, and they're injured by a mystical, obviously otherworldly source, who tells them that they will never be able to be healed unless they encounter a different mystical, otherworldly, marvelous situation. And he basically goes off, alone to possibly die in the woods. And let's see. He was keen to get away, for he did not want any of his followers to come and hinder him or to attempt to detain him. A green path traversed the woods, which led him out into an open space. And there he sees a bunch of stuff. There's a harbor where there's a magical boat that sails itself off to a place that has green marble walls, which contains the person that is the magical person, who can heal him with love. But, in that case, the green is being used to say, okay, now he's embarking upon this adventure to hopefully get healed. That doesn't mean that he's going to be able to deal with what the adventure throws at him, but when they start mentioning green, that's going to be a signifier that the adventure is beginning. In Crescendo Toi's Percival, he does a bunch of stuff. At one point, he ends up, he is not well equipped to deal with adventure. He's a bit of a jank knight. He didn't quite figure out how to be knightly all the way. He's got a sort of bare bones idea, but doesn't apply it very well. It's a sort of common theme for him throughout his story. He kind of misses the point. And so he's talking to this fisherman, and he literally cannot see the path to the adventure until the fisherman points it out to him a whole bunch, at which point he can see the path, but he doesn't see anything down the path until the proper knight, the Fisher King, points out, but there's stuff down the path. Can you see your adventure? And then Percival's like, oh yeah, I can totally see there's a castle over there. In this case, they don't mention that the path is green, but anytime you have a sort of a foresty path, it's kind of implied that it's green. And then you get into such a strong association with the forest being marvelous that you have Bisclavret, who literally runs off into the forest every couple weeks to be a werewolf. And this is fine. His problems don't really lie with being a werewolf. They lie with interacting with silly parts of society. So yeah, green is a signifier of the marvelous. You have to know a bunch of other stuff about what exactly that's going to look like. Like, you see green marble walls. Well, we don't know what's going to be in there, but, we've got hints from earlier in the story. So we've got white, which that one still very much has a lot of the same meanings now in literature. For clothing, this is generally going to be linen. There are a few garments in the 12th century that are generally made out of a white linen. Your chemise would be made out of it. That's your base layer. Kind of underwear shift type thing. A chains will be a linen garment that is usually worn more around the house. It might have some interesting detailing on it, like smocking, kind of trapunto type stuff, quilting. Could have some fancy details. It would very often be like not this layer, but if this layer then also maybe had like fleur-fille sleeves. It's a really fancy linen house coat kind of deal. anytime you see someone being described as wearing a chains in literature, or just their linen, their white linen, like chemise, that's suggestive. But also, if they're being described as being clothed in white, they're probably also being implied that, this situation has at least the capacity for purity, for goodness. The, the purity of the color white also extends to ermine. There is a urban legend that the ermine would drop its fur off rather than get it dirty, which was really just saying that we skin the ermine when they're in their winter coats before they switch out to their summer coats that are more brown. But let's not examine the fact that we're skinning critters, and they totally just drop them rather than get them dirty. Yeah. So in the in the ones that I was looking at, I mean, these happen all over the place. I just pulled examples quickly from a couple of stories, but in Marie de France's L'Envol, L'Envol ends up basically dating a fairy. There are other things that signify this, but she can literally just turn invisible whenever she wants. She can speak to him. She can be present and talking to him, but only he can hear her. She can decide to be seen by everybody else whenever she wants. She's definitely a fairy. And L'Envol ends up on trial because Guinevere was hitting on him, and he was like, "No, I've got a girlfriend, and she is way hotter than you. Sorry." And of course, Guinevere was mad about that, and he was put on trial for lying and being mean. And the only way for him to be acquitted was for his lady to show up. Of course, the idea of their relationship was that he wasn't ever allowed to talk about it. So in theory, he thinks he has completely lost his relationship. When he mentions it as a way of getting Guinevere to back off. But his lady does actually come to acquit him. And when she comes into town, she's, among other things, described as riding a white palfrey horse. She is wearing a white chemise that they specifically say is laced up the sides so you can see her sides. So she's like riding around in her underwear. I mean, she has a mantle too, but we'll get to that later. But the context of the story means that she is the best of the best. She's better than any actual person. She's better than Queen Guinevere, in all ways, not just in looks, because she's literally a fairy. And in this case, being literally a fairy is the best. We've also got things like Guichemar's stag. The reason that Guichemar was hurt was that he made the very poor decision to shoot a pure white stag. And we know what that means. Pure white stag is pure, and you shouldn't touch them. You shouldn't violate them. He shot one, and it was basically like, well, cool, you're cursed. And you're not going to get better until you find a magical someone to heal you with love, but you are basically ace, so good luck with that. Yeah, that would be use of white. This is one of the big ones. Orfrois. Orfrois are bands of gold. I have included a little picture here to show an extant example of what Orfrois is. Orfrois is a piece of basically trim that literally has gold worked into it. It could be woven in, or it could be embroidered, or it could be both. It originated in the Middle East as bands along the edges of fabric that was made in like only one or two silk production facilities that were the royal silk production facilities. And originally, the bands on the edges were basically part maker's mark, part, you know, noble endorsement, and part blessing. They would have Kufic script woven into them to, bless the silk house, the garment, the people wearing it, and whoever was in charge. And that ended up being at the edges of material, and it would be shown on the biceps. So when folks from like Western Europe ended up over in the Middle East in the Crusader states, when some of them ended up in charge of areas or estates or whatever, if they were well thought of and respected, they might be given a piece of Orfrois to put on their arm to show that they were well respected by whoever it said. And that fashion, the idea of it, migrated back until you see the use of bicep bands as a decorative element in clothing. It kind of got appropriated, and they didn't necessarily know what the script meant, so they switched out how it was made and turned it into geometric kind of floral type elements instead. And that became a fashion thing. And it wouldn't necessarily be actually done with gold, but actual Orfrois was done with actual gold. In some of the stories, you will find a tent. Just one side of this tent is covered, striped in Orfrois. The entire tent is made out of this fanciest, literally gold material with these golden bands. So Percival encounters a tent that has Orfrois stripes. And we can assume that this implies that whoever is associated with this tent should be respected the most. This is a very respectable person. Also, bordering on not actually feasible, possibly slightly otherworldly, but very respectable. And he does not treat them with respect at all. And this sort of sets the tone for us understanding that Percival does not get it. The Orfrois bands are used in Marie de France's eunuch. So this is eunuch is a shapeshifter fairy type who comes to visit a lady who's being poorly treated, becomes her lover. He can turn into a hawk. Her abusive husband finds out, puts up iron spikes. They kill the hawk. And eunuch flies home to die in his fancy fairy kingdom, which eventually the lady and her son go and stumble across. They find his tomb, and his tomb is covered with cloth covered in bands of Orfrois. And you can tell by the bends that this is a person who was to be respected the most. So then when, the son finds out that whoever this amazingly respectable person was actually his dad and was killed by this mean dude, the son acts accordingly. It's basically used as a way to establish a respectable identity, or imply that someone or a situation should be respected. And then whether or not the people in the story actually follow that rule, kind of, that's what the story's about. The example I've got on here is just move that off to the side just in case that's showing. The example I've got on there is actual extant Orfrois from King William II of Sicily. That one was done, it's gold on green silk. Moving on to another color. Okay, so I was talking about how Percival was a bit of a clueless knight. So in a lot of literature and just descriptions of this time, the ceremony of being knighted generally involved two main gifts as far as clothing goes. One of them was a suit of armor, and in this genre, if it's Arthur giving you your armor, it's probably going to be gold. And then you would be given a red mantle. At this point, the Imperial Tyrian purples are kind of being replaced in use by Kermes cochineal red. So a red mantle is a just slightly more accessible version of the Tyrian Byzantine purple. So this armor, if someone ends up in red armor, and they're a knight in a story, you can be like, okay, they're a knight. However, Percival, like the way that color association is used in Christian's Percival, is basically to prove that Percival is not really a correct knight. He got the red armor, he kind of got the idea, and he does not apply it correctly. So he goes to Arthur's court. Arthur's like, cool, hey bud, you want to be a knight? I'm going to give you golden armor. And Percival's like, I don't want it. I like my scruffy furs and leather and stuff. That's fine. But there's this guy out there who is kind of mean to me, and he's got red armor, and I actually just want his armor, so can I have it? And Arthur's like, huh? So Percival runs out the door and basically spears the Red Knight to death and takes his armor. But he doesn't even know how to get the armor off of the Red Knight, and has to have someone from the castle comes out and is like, okay, so we're not going to chop him up to get the armor off. Here's how to undo armor. Here's how to put your armor on. Okay, there you go. Good job. You're a knight. But putting Percival in this armor, how he acquires it, and his complete, just inability to grasp how it works, is very much on theme for his the rest of his knightly interactions. He tries, he really does. He just kind of doesn't make it. So this and his interactions with the people in the Orfrois covered tent that he super duper disrespects, that sets the tone for probably, is he going to be able to find the Grail? I mean, find, sure. He can't get it. He can't even really determine that it is a Grail, because he doesn't apply he might be a knight, but he doesn't know how to be a knight. And if he knew how to be a knight, he'd be able to get the Grail. So sometimes using a signifier of knighthood, and red doesn't always mean knightly. Usually means expensive, but in this case, the red armor being used for Percival signifies that he's a knight, but it also, because of the rest of the context, implies that he kind of missed the point. We have, this is the last color that I'm looking at. So we have purple. I'm using the term that comes up in the literature in French, because this is almost always translated as purple. You know, you get a translated text, it's going to say they're wearing purple. This gets confusing because they will say they made such black purple, or they made, you know, they were wearing red purple. Pourpre is not purple the color. Pourpre is silk, and it is silk that has been dyed imperial purple, Tyrian purple, which is made using a murex snail. It's a carnivorous snail that has a little ink type gland. You can either milk the snails as a sustainable process, or get a whole lot of them and squash them, grind them up, and then there's a very complex process which we don't really have anymore, to make imperial purple. This is Tyrian purple, Alexandrian purple, Byzantine purple. That's the same thing. It's the purple used, made using the murex snails. It would take about 10,000 snails to get enough dye to do the trim on a garment. So if you ever read a story where if they mention purple, it's probably, if it's a translation from a French text, probably the original word was pourpre, and it was probably implying that this is silk that has been so over dyed in this snail purple that it is literally not possible to make it. This is not a possible item. As far as, you know, anybody reading the stories or hearing the stories would be concerned, this is such an intense snail dye on a silk that it's going to be otherworldly. So in Laval, where he's got the fairy girlfriend, we know that she's going to be a fairy before we even see her, because she has two handmaidens who are dressed head to toe in pourpre. And they come out and say, "Oh, hi, Laval. How's it going? My lady wants to talk to you." You can't be a normal person and be dressed head to toe in pourpre. It can't exist. And, you know, so it will be a signifier of, even if the person wearing it maybe isn't a fairy or a marvelous or a kind of supernatural type critter, there were probably fairies involved at some point, or at least snails. And honestly, snails are about as common as fairies as far as an average person is concerned in this situation. Did I miss anything there? Yeah, no, that's about right. So I'm going to go back to our kind of overview of general ideas here. So we've got, you know, the same idea. You get, you know, green means probably you're going on an adventure. This does not necessarily mean a good thing, and you may not be able to handle it, but it's happening now. White is going to be pure or alluring. What you do with that information will affect the story. How you interact with anything related to bands of Orfrois will affect the story. But you can guess that anything that has bands of Orfrois is implied that it is worthy and good, and then you can see things about the other people interacting with it based on how they interact with the Orfrois identity. We've got red in this case, red armor specifically, being probably a knight, but does that mean you're actually a knight? Kind of missed it, just slightly missed it. And then purple isn't really purple. It's kind of purple. It might be as dark as black. It might be a reddish tint. The actual visual color isn't necessarily purple. It's going to be a very dark silk, so dark that it's impossible. Probably fairies were involved. So I'm going to exit out of here. I do have a bibliography reading list, which I'm going to leave up there for a second if people want to screenshot it, because I have not really made this. This is a very scruffy PowerPoint, so I wasn't really intending to show it, but that's there if y'all want it, and I'm going to exit my screen share. So at this point, please say things, because I've been babbling for a while.
So I am a language person.
Yeah.
And I'm a Latin teacher and all that stuff mundanely. And I love 12th century France. So I did a lot of it in college, and so this is very cool for me.
Yeah.
But as a language person, I'm going to geek out for just 5 seconds. Romance is about being in the vernacular and not in Latin.
Yes.
And that was the thing about the romances, is that they were more accessible because they were vernacular.
Yeah, and that's one of Marie de France's main
big things.
Big things is other than writing her lays, she translated a whole bunch of things, Aesop's fables, from Latin and Greek and stuff into the vernacular. So one of the defining features of the romance was that it would be in the vernacular, whatever that was.
Whatever the local was, sure.
Yeah, right. And then another big feature of the romance was that it was a contrast with epics. So instead of being the fighty, describe the battles, aren't they so cool because they're smashing each other? It's aren't they so cool because they're actually like interacting like decent people. So, and a whole development of that whole, what does that mean?
Well, thank you so much. This was very cool. I have lots of notes.
Yay, cool. Yeah. Anyone else got any things?
There was a comment in the chat from when you were talking about the red armor. Was what parts of the armor are red?
Just the entire freaking thing. An entire suit of armor that is red. It was red before Percival borked them.
Is it metal? Is it cloth? Is it like?
Oh, they don't say.
Okay.
Yeah, it's armor. It's red armor.
They went
to difficult details when you can just assert things.
No, they went to Home Depot and got spray paint, of course.
They got the red buckets, right?
But Percival really wants that red armor because he knows you gotta the red stuff goes with being a knight, right? So he's got the red idea. He's just gonna go gork some dude whose armor he likes and refuse the actual gold armor from the king. It was the entire set of armor, and they mentioned that instead of taking it off of the dead knight correctly, Percival's hauling on it and suggests when somebody comes up from the castle to try and help him, he's like, you got any ideas? Because I'm gonna have to chop this guy up to get the armor off of him. And they're like, oh, don't do that. That's not, no. Here's how to actually undo the armor. And so they teach him that. So presumably it's got at least some straps and stuff and can be removed from a dead knight.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to hop over to the next one, but
Well, thank
much
you very much.
obliged. Enjoy.
Yay.
Don't get too
Thank you.
snowed in.
We are not snowy over here. We're a tiny bit rainy, but at least it's daylight now.
There you go. All righty. Be well.
Thank you very much.
Well, again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for our instructor. And I'm going to stop the recording now, and we can go on over to the keynote.